we define life? What characteristic or characteristics distinguish living things from non-living things? Well, spoilers alert, there's not a simple definition. In this class, we're going to learn about 7 characteristics that distinguish living things from non-living things. We're going to use the acronym R.O.A.C.H.E.S to help us remember these 7 characteristics. The R in R.O.A.C.H.E.S stands for reproduction. This could be sexual reproduction, like these little flowers are doing, or it could be through asexual reproduction through cloning. Sexual reproduction is how organisms are going to get a genetic shuffling of the deck. We're going to spend a whole chapter talking about the sources of genetic variation within sexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction is through cloning, so it takes less energy, takes fewer parents, but you don't get that same genetic diversity that's really important for evolution. We'll spend a chapter talking about asexual reproduction as well.
The O in R.O.A.C.H.E.S is for ordered complexity. Each level of organization depends on the smaller levels. So we'll start with a biosphere. That's the whole, all the life on Earth. We can zoom in on the ecosystem and look at the interactions of all the living things with each other and with their abiotic or the non-living parts of their environment. Okay, then we can get even more specific and not worry about the non-living parts and only look at the species interactions and how these different species are going to affect each other. And that's at the community level. Then we can get even more specific and look at just all of the individuals of a population. So we're looking here just at the parrots, or we can zoom in a little bit closer and look at what's going on with just one single individual at the organism level. And then each organism is composed of organs. Each organ is composed of tissues. All tissues are composed of cells. Cells are composed of molecules and macromolecules. And then our smallest scale is what's going on at the atomic level. And each of these levels depends on what's going on at the lower levels. So if we want to understand how organ systems work together, we need to understand tissues and cells. If we want to understand cells, then we need to look at what's going on at the molecular level. If we need to know what's going on at the molecular level, we need to understand what's going on at atoms. So that's why in this first semester biology course, we're going to focus on the small scale. So we're going to look at atoms, we're going to look at molecules for our first couple chapters, and then we'll spend the rest of the class looking at the cellular levels. And then as you go on in your education, then we'll start to look at these bigger scales.
The A in R.O.A.C.H.E.S stands for adaptation. All organisms are subject to evolution by means of natural selection, resulting in adaptations that allow them to survive and reproduce in their given environment.
The C in R.O.A.C.H.E.S is for cellular organization. And that brings us to our first scientific theory of the class, which is cell theory. And cell theory says that first, all living things are composed of one or more cells. 2, cells are the basic structure and function of functional units of life. And 3, all cells come from pre-existing cells. All life is cellular. So if you are a living thing, you must have a cell. And if whatever kind of cell you are, whether you're a fungal cell or a plant cell or an animal cell or an algal cell or a bacteria cell, all cells have these 4 things in common. All cells are bound by a plasma membrane. And we're going to spend a whole chapter talking about plasma membranes and how it creates this outside-inside interface environment. On the inside of that plasma membrane is cytoplasm, or what I call cell juice. And this is the gooey insides of the cells, all the organelles and all the nutrients that the cells need in order to maintain life are found in that gooey inside. So cyto means cell, plasm is the gooey bits, so we call it cell juice. The third thing that all cells have in common with each other is this organelle called a ribosome. And these ribosomes are really important because this is how we build proteins. If you can't build proteins, you can't do all of these other characteristics of life that we're discussing with our R.O.A.C.H.E.S acronym. Okay, so our fourth thing that all cells have is DNA, or if you want to impress your friends and be nerdy about it, you can call it deoxyribose nucleic acid. And our DNA, holds all the instructions to build all those proteins that we need the ribosomes for. And that's going to allow those organisms to build their survival machines, right? To build their bodies to The H in roaches stands for homeostasis. And what homeostasis is this relatively stable internal environment, even if we have this big varying external environmental conditions. Okay, so some examples of homeostasis: blood pressure, oxygen levels, body temperature, immune responses. These are all things that are going to remain pretty stable. Type 1 diabetes is a good example of what happens when homeostasis goes wrong. My youngest daughter was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in 2023. And what's happening is that her immune system is attacking the cells in her pancreas that produce the protein insulin. And insulin is the protein that allows the sugar in your blood to actually enter your cells, and so your cells can then use it to produce energy. When non-diabetic people eat carbohydrates, our blood sugar increases, which triggers our cells to produce insulin. Insulin then allows the sugar to move into the cells, keeping the sugar concentration in the blood within this kind of small, narrow window of variability. When a type 1 diabetic eat without injecting themselves with insulin, their blood sugar would just increase, because we don't have the proteins that allow that sugar to be used by the cells. So when we get to the cellular respiration chapter, we'll talk about the consequences that happens when we don't have that homeostasis because of that insulin. And then our last characteristics of living things is the S in roaches, which stands for sensitivity. All organisms sense and respond to their environment. Examples can be as obvious as my dog's barking at the Amazon guy. So sorry, Amazon guy. Our skunk's raised tail. One of my cats got sprayed last night, which is so much worse than having the dogs sprayed because you can't really bathe the cat. Some examples that might be less obvious for organisms responding to stimuli can be the dilation of pupils in response to light intensity, or the gravity sensing in plant roots.